Joining me now, first class father, Senator Marco Rubio. Welcome to First Class Fatherhood.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on. I hope I'm a first class father. Trying.
Well, you're here, so you got the title now. So it's an honor to have you here. Let's start like this. How many kids do you have? How old are they?
I have four. Well, yeah, kids. I have two daughters that are 23 and about to turn 21, and then I have a son he's about to turn 18, going to college. He's going to play football at the University of Florida. So we're like in the middle of the graduation stuff, and it's actually an interesting dynamic. The difference between boys and girls. And then I have a younger one who's only 15. So all my kids are all very different, and they present not both very unique moments of joy and very unique challenges that are different to one another. But it's the most, you said this at the outset, it's the most important job I'll ever have. It's the most impact I'll ever have on lives, is on their four lives, for better or for worse.
Well said. There's no doubt about that. And I'm right there with you. We got four kids ourselves. You got the even split. We got three boys, then got our girl on the fourth try. So, and I do understand a little bit about the dynamic. So take me back then about 20 something years ago. About how old were you when you first became a father, and how did that experience kind of change your perspective on life?
Well, I was 29, and it was in 2000 when my daughter was born in April. And, it changes your life in a fundamental way. And that is, it's no longer about you. I think it arises different feelings in men and women, and fathers and mothers. But for me, it was sort of like this sense of, I now have it's the first time in my life that I have been responsible entirely at that stage for the life of another human being, for everything, from whether they're going to have enough to eat to whether they're going to be able to make sure they get medical attention if they get sick. And that's just the beginning, from there. And obviously with your first child, I think back at that time, my daughter was 2 weeks old, and I was in the state legislature, and we just threw her in a car seat and drove up to Tallahassee, and obviously the old, Cuban grandmother and Colombian grandmother were like, screaming at us, you can't take a baby out of the house after the first 2 weeks, they get infections, but we just kind of roll with it, and so, it was a very special time in our life. It was just the three of us. And I always tell people about kids, I said, when you have one or two kids, you can play man to man, but when you get to three or four, now you're playing zone. Now you're the two of you are kind of covering areas and triaging a lot. But it has been, just I really can't imagine what my life would have been like had I not had my kids. I've been blessed with that. It really is the greatest. I used to hear people say that as a cliche all the time. There's the greatest joys and purpose in my life I've ever found is through them.
Yeah, really great stuff, Senator. And what would you say then? Obviously living a very public life, the political field, I know in our country, is absolutely chaotic. It seems like it's been on fire for the last 5 years or so. What would you say are some of the biggest challenges of being a senator, being in the public life while being a father?
Well, I would say this. First of all, my kids have grown up in it. So since the time she was born, I was out of politics for a couple of years, but I basically was in the state legislature, and then I ran for Senate. So my kids don't really have a memory of a time that I wasn't a public figure at some level. Now, maybe not the way it's been the last 10 years, but at some level, it's always been a part of their lives. Look, the biggest challenge is the one thing you can't get back, and that's time. I don't care who you are or how much money you make. We all get 7 days in a week and 24 hours in a day. That's what you have. And so how you allocate that time is important. And I would say the biggest struggle has been this challenge between, the guilt, or in some cases, the necessity of dedicating time to what it takes to raise a family and being not just around, but present, and the demands of a career and a job. And I really wrestled with that for a very long time. And kind of the balance I found is the following. Number one is, it's good for kids to see that dad has a job and that dad is working. It's a good thing for kids to see that dad is busy, that dad has things to do. It's good for kids to grow up seeing a dad who serves. And I know a lot of people don't view politics that way, but there are things I have to go do that may not be how I would spend a Saturday afternoon, where the choice mine, but it's an honor to do it, and I have a chance to serve others. So I think that's a very positive thing, because I can tell you, my dad was not a talker. Okay, he was not a sit me down, give me a lecture, life lessons, stuff from a commercial. My dad was a doer, and I learned most of what I know about being both a man and a father through modeling, through example, through what I saw. What I saw was this: a dad who got up every day, went to work because he had to, and came home every night to his family. He didn't go drink with his buddies at the bar, didn't go on a 3-day weekend, didn't vanish, didn't show up at 3 a.m. drunk with my mom screaming at him because he had lipstick on his collar. You learn. and you learn from that example, you learn from the modeling. And so to me, for kids to see a dad who's busy working, serving, I think, that's how I've balanced it out. And then obviously, look, I would say this. There are things I've missed because of family. I've missed stuff at work if I can't. If it's something that's never going to happen again, I don't miss it. Unless it's like the urgent end of the world thing. I try not to miss things that are never going to happen again. You're never going to play your life's high school football game. You're never going to, graduate. There are things you're never going to get to do again. I don't miss things that are never going to happen again. If it's just a run of the mill thing, whatever, and I hate to miss it, but I got to be at work. And that's, my dad had to do that. He was a bartender.
Well, I love what you have to say there, Senator, especially about the importance of being there and being present and being a doer as a father so your kids see it. Because I stress on this show, and in my opinion, it's the number one social issue we have in our country, and that's the fatherless crisis. We have had a breakdown of our nuclear family units, and you combine, the fact that the father has been removed from the home and our heavenly father has been removed from our society. And those two things combined, I think, are responsible for 99% of all the trouble we're seeing in our country here. And if we can get our fathers back in the home and our heavenly father back in our lives, I think most of these problems go away. What's your take?
No, I think that's right. Look, I think young men, I know we're in an era now where people debate things about gender and biology. The bottom line is this morning, the sun rose in the east and it's going to set in the west like it has for thousands and thousands of years. And men are men and women are women, and they're different. They're equal. They're equally important. God loves them both just as much. They play both exact equal and vital roles in society, but they are different. And one of the things about young men in particular is young men have a biological innate the programmed by the manufacturer desire at an adolescent age to stand out, to make themselves attractive to the opposite sex. I'm going to be a good mate. I'm going to be somebody that you want to marry and be with. And so when young men do not have positive examples, what that looks like, and positive opportunities to do things that are constructive, then I think they become victims to negativity, meaning depression and suicide, violence, or frankly, they just go into the funk where you sit around, your identity becomes, I'm really good at video games because I play them 17 hours a day and things of that nature. And then society begins to break down. You talk about fathers not in the home. There are a lot of fathers who frankly, abandon their kids. They just flat out get up and go, and provide nothing. And I have zero tolerance for that. And I think that's a real systemic problem. And then the third, and I see this a lot in many of our communities, is the lack of male role models in general in many places. And in some of our communities, talk about the African-American community, but also in some Hispanic communities in this country, the number of young men incarcerated is higher than the number of young men who are going to college or vocational training or the like. Society just can't function that way. Young men now have no positive role models. Listen, one of the ministries in this country that I think is really crucial is your sports coaches, particularly high school football coaches. They are in many ways the single most influential male role model that many young men will have. And that's why, to me, it's not so much about wins and losses, but it's also about how you win, how you lose, and the lessons you learn from that. So I do think this is a major problem in our country, and I don't think government can fix it. I think government can't make it worse, but I honestly think we as a society need to wake up and understand that just like we tell people, you shouldn't smoke and you shouldn't drink and drive and you shouldn't be overweight because you'll get diabetes. I think we need to tell society, you need fathers and we need men.
There's no doubt about it. And there is limited, I think, that government can do. I did have Governor DeSantis on here shortly after he did the Fatherhood Initiative bill down there in Florida. And I pray that more states will follow suit and do what they can for it. But yeah, I mean, we talk about every time there's shootings going on, they point to the guns, and it's most of these people. We're filling up the prison systems in this country with fatherless young men, and that's really at the basis of all of these things. So I pray to God that we could do. And part of that is the discipline aspect of this, the father that brings that discipline to the household too. So I wanted to ask you, what type of disciplinarian are you as a father? And is that different than the discipline style you grew up with?
Yeah. So I would tell you that because of the nature of my work and my travel and everything like that, I mean, I don't know what my family would look like if my wife were not who she were. And she, as a mother, did all the things she does to nurture, care, and provide, and so forth. And so the way I would put it is that, my wife is the early intervention person. She's the response team. She's like, and I'm the SWAT team. She's the street cop that's out there every day sort of policing whether you're going too fast, whether, you committed some sort of infraction. But if it's, when it reaches a certain level, then I get involved. And look, my discipline is pretty simple. And I think it changes as they get older. But life is about decisions and the consequences to every decision. Everything has a price. You have to give up something to get something, whether that's buying or whether it's with your time. right? With your time, you decide, all right, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to sleep 8 hours or 7 hours. I'm going to work out. I'm going to spend. So you got to make choices. You can't have it all. And you can only expect to get back what you put in. So in the case of mistakes, one of the mistakes that I've observed that some people make, and I think we're guilty of it too, by the way, I am, is we try to protect our kids from adversity. We try to protect our kids from negativity. We try to protect our kids from things that are unpleasant. And I don't think that's real. I think that's a fantasy. And I think that's actually debilitating, because the ability to deal with adversity is critically important. So as a perfect example, my son a few days ago got a traffic ticket, his first one ever, not for speeding, thank God, but he was going across some lanes he was supposed to go. He's going to have to take care of it. He's going to have to figure out how to pay for it. He's going to have to figure out how to do the paperwork of it, and take care of all that. That's a consequence of it. I think a lot of times there are people that just swoop in and sort of fix it, or tell their kids, you didn't do anything wrong. These cops are out of control. And I think what you're setting people up for is a life of, it's why now we have a situation where a lot of young people, the first time they hear somebody say something they don't like, or encounter something that's unpleasant, they immediately demand that who they perceive as the adults, whether it's a university president or their boss or whoever, fix it. You got to come in and fix it because this is unpleasant. Life has a lot of things that are unpleasant. It's part of the process. And I just think the lack of resiliency in young people today, I can attribute to the parents sort of stepping in and prevent. So to me, is discipline in many cases is allowing the natural consequences of things to play out. For you do something wrong, you're going to have to pay for it. It's not punishment; it's consequence.
Yeah, very well said. And thank God, he took his ticket and moved on instead of, hey, you know who my father is? He's Senator Rubio, and tried to get out of it that way.
In some places, I might have gotten him 2 tickets. So, I'm just sorry.
Yeah, that's true. And going a little deeper into that, then, Senator, what would you say then are all the top value? I know faith is a big part of your life. I'm a faith-based person myself. I'm a person that my family sit down at the dinner table every night together. We eat together. We pray together. It's a huge part of our life. So how big is faith in raising your kids, and what are the top values you hope to instill in all of them as they grow up?
Yeah, 2 things about faith. The first is just the belief as a Christian, right, that we're called to eternal life, that we're not supposed to die. We were not supposed to get sick. We were not supposed to have. That's all a consequence of sin. Sin entered the world. Some people now, death entered the world. And so now we're going through this process of ridding ourselves from that so we can actually live forever the way we were intended to when we were first created. So that's that piece of it. And it's important to keep focused on that. When the problems seem so big in the world, you recognize there's this thing called eternity, and that's what our aim is. And then there's a second component to it, and that is right or wrong. And if you have to have a moral code, a compass of what is absolutely right and what is absolutely wrong. And in the absence of faith, and I could say this about Christianity, Judaism, frankly, Islam, all of them, in the absence of faith as sort of the foundation of a moral code, then what is your moral code? Well, your moral code is now, if it's without that, it's based on what humans think is right or wrong from their own mind. But humans are pretty diverse. So what you may think is wrong and what I may think is wrong are 2 very different things. Suddenly it's like murder is wrong unless fill in the blank. I don't like them. They're not born yet. They looked at me the wrong way. They're disabled, and really this is not a good life. And so, you can start to fill in the blanks of how terrible that could get. So to me, the importance of faith in any society is that it gives you a grounding that says, A, you're not the center of the universe, and B, here's absolute right and here's absolute wrong. And it may not be what you feel is right or wrong or what you wish were right or wrong, but this gives you a code to regulate it. When you don't have that, you kind of get into the chaos we now face, which is everything is relative. And if everything's relative, then nothing is real.
And I think that's why I say it goes back to those 2 things combined, because if you have no faith at all in your life, and then you have no father in the home as well, or no family structure, we're crippling these kids in our country when you don't have any of that to lean on. So I think they go together. And I know that we just had the NFL draft. I know your son now committed to Florida. He had some D1 offers, chose to go to Florida, your alma mater over that. What was the decision process like for your son, Anthony, to make that decision? And what is it like for you as a dad and his former coach to see him do that?
Well, to me, a couple things. First of all, it was his decision to make. Ultimately, my view of it always was, and I'm being frank here, he's a good student and he works hard, but the University of Florida is impossible to get into it. So, and this is a route by which he could do that. I think he gets to play at a top-notch SEC program. And, however good he's ever going to be in athletics, he's going to be able to do it at an SEC school because of the resources they have. Ultimately, I think the coaching staff there, Coach Napier and them are people that are also deeply grounded in their faith, and we had really felt good about that. We felt good about a bunch of the coaches, but it was his decision, and also he just grew up being a fan of the program, so I think that's where he naturally wanted to wind up. He could have gone far away from home, but it was his decision, the most important decision he's yet made in his life, and I like the process that he used for it. Here's what sports always was for me, beyond the admissions advantage. I don't have to have fake videos of him rowing to get into college. I mean, it was a real thing. Is the other advantages, it's the things you learn through athletics that you can't teach or lecture in a classroom about. You have to show up on time. You're accountable to other people. You're expected to do a job. You have to give up things to get things. You have to do things that you may not necessarily want to do, but need to be done. And I don't know how you teach that outside of some setting that forces you to apply it at a young age. And so to me, that's always been the advantage. At the end of the day, a lot of times there are times where, this summer is a perfect example. My son's friends, they're all graduating. The parents, there's this big group that they do every year at their high school, are going to go to Bimini, have a great time. My son has to be in Gainesville on May 29th to report. He will have no summer break, really, for the most part. And he's not complaining about it. Hey, I've had to spend Christmas Eve in the Capitol voting, to keep the government open. So there are times when that happens. And it's important for you to, if you can learn that at 18, if you can show up on time, and if you can just wake up in the morning and show up on time, I think you got 50% of life figured out these days. And to me, athletics was a way to sort of reinforce those values.
Well, I know, Senator, so many parents are concerned. They send their kids to college, and then 4 years later, they come out hating America. They're anti-police, they're activists, and all this stuff. But even now, hold on, I'm just getting a little blowback there. Even now, at the younger level, in the grammar schools, we're seeing it now. I'm in New Jersey here. The curriculum has changed. A lot of this LGBTQ curriculum stuff, transgender, gender identity, is being forced on kids as young as kindergarten, and parents have had enough of it, and they go to the school board meetings and try to stand up against it. They're being shouted down, called bigoted, and they're really at a loss for it. So many parents behind the scenes, away from it, will say, what is going on with our country here? What has happened to the school systems here? So what is your message to parents out there that have really just had it, and they're afraid of speaking out, because when they do, they're labeled as a bigot, and they're published on social media, and they're shouted down?
Well, as far as being afraid, I understand that no one wants to be singled out, but you're not willing to fight for your kids, and there's nothing for you to fight for. And look, ultimately, I think that's why efforts to intimidate parents never work. I think there's a lot of people out there that go along with the woke stuff and all that because they just don't want the hassle. To be honest with you, they just don't want the hassle, okay? But not when it comes to their kids. That's where they draw the line. They'll claw your eyes out when you're going to come after their kids. And you're seeing that play itself out. But look, this is not surprising. Okay, you tell everybody in order to be a teacher or be anywhere, you have to go to college. So we send people to college, often get huge debt loads, and then we send them into these places that are always been left of center, but that basically in every curriculum, from those liberal arts to the sciences, is just constantly pounding a one-line ideology, largely from the left, I think Marxist left, that has long dominated academia, with the new dynamic is no space for counterpoints of view, right? So in many of these campuses, any counterpoint of view is now considered hateful, extremist. We have a right to go in and blow up your meeting. And so the result is you now have been producing for 2 decades a workforce that has been inculcated in this. And who are these people now, 20 years later? Well, they're CEOs. They're school board administrators and superintendents. They're principals. They're the people that are in charge of the media and increasingly in politics. They are no longer just the young kids. The theory always was, don't worry about it. Once they go out into the real world and start paying taxes and have their own kids, their whole minds will change. Well, it hasn't. It's only reinforced itself and accelerated. So what we're facing now is the consequences of 20 years of indoctrination finding its way now into positions of authority and power, to the point where it doesn't just there. In many cases, it's, the stuff with Disney was driven by employees. Sometimes, somebody goes work at a company and a week later is joining an online, pressure the boss campaign to divest of this and fire that and silence this person. So that is what's happening. And I think the problem with that is that it's happening. It's not like we are setting the world on fire in this country in academic achievement in math and science and technology and even the basics of history. So that's got to be the priority of our higher education system. And like I said earlier, you have limited time. You get these kids 7 hours a day. Every hour you spend on some of this other stuff, which there is no consensus on, is an hour you're not spending on these essentials that we're already struggling with as a country. And so the countries we're competing against aren't spending any time on this stuff. And to the extent they talk about it, they're reinforcing values that are positive for the country, not divisive.
It's wild what's going on, Senator, and the fact that you have men competing in women's sports and people are arguing that it's okay. Like everyone's kind of just wondering what the heck has happened here, but it's very sad. So I know you got a new book dropping real soon, Decades of Decadence. What's the? I know it's coming out June 13th, I believe. What's the book about? What can we expect?
Well, the book is about really it's about the decadence and the complacency that comes from the end of the Cold War. The Cold War ends. All the smart people said, hey, everyone's going to be a democracy now. We can do anything we want. Borders don't matter anymore. Economies don't matter anymore. National economies, we're all just going to be global citizens. And it doesn't matter where things are made and so forth. The consequences to that were threefold. One, jobs and industries left America, not just destroying entire communities, but leaving millions of Americans without hope. The second is we got complacent, and everything we've just talked about in our culture. And so today spend time on things that are just completely unimaginable just 10 years ago. I mean, 10 years ago, if you were to ask Barack Obama or Joe Biden, do you support some of the things that Biden now supports? They would have said absolutely not. The pendulum has moved so quickly. So the result of the decadence is the thinking that, look, America's automatic. We have no competitor. We can do anything we want with our economy, and we can do anything we want with our society. And then we wake up one day and say, oh my gosh, the consequences of this are not just domestic. We've basically funded the rise of China and the rise of their middle class at the expense of ours. We now have not just a competitor, we now face the most powerful and potent competitor this nation's ever faced. And we're way behind on responding to it. And we need to respond to it holistically, in our economy, in our society, in our culture, and everything else. And so the core of the book is to point to these challenges and then to outline some of the answers to it as well. But the bottom line is this: we are no longer in a stage in history where we can do anything we want. America is in a competition, and it's a competition we're going to lose if we keep doing what we're doing now.
Yeah, no doubt about that. I'll drop a link to the book, Decades of Decadence, June 13th. I'll put the link in the description of this podcast episode so my listeners can pre-order. Listen, I know I won't get an endorsement out of you for 2024 here, but I would like to ask you this. I know you ran for president in the past. If you were president today, or you became president, what would you do on day one? How do we fix and get this country back on the right track? What would be your play?
Well, the first thing is I would eliminate from government through regulatory executive order all of these things Biden's put in place that inject things that really have no place in government. The job of the federal government primarily is to keep America safe, and then some additional responsibilities are regulating interstate commerce and the like. But that's the primary job of the federal government. And anything else, whether it's in the military, in the intelligence agencies, or the labor department, there is no such thing as racist roads. There is no such thing as some of this other stuff. Look, at the end of the day, my view on some of those things is if you're a man, a fully grown adult man, and decides you want to live life as a woman, that's your choice. It's a free country. Here's what you can't do. You can't make me pay for it. You can't change the rules for everybody else, and you can't mess with the kids. Okay, so I would go through those three things very quickly and get that. But the primary challenge, the number one thing, and it isn't a bill, we need a strategy for how we are going to reorient our economy. So as an example, there are things that make sense from a pure market standpoint. It is cheaper to buy things from China or make them over there. It is not in our national interest to depend on China for medicine, for rare earth minerals, God forbid, for agriculture one day. And so we need that. There are some adjustments we're going to have to make to the orthodoxy of our economics, our culture, our society. And we in Congress can put ideas and talk about it, but really it takes presidential leadership to say, this is the goal of our country that we need to rally and unite around. And then every policy that you make, you tie it and explain why it works towards achieving that goal. And to me, that's what the next president has to do. If the next president of the United States is not committed to getting this right in terms of reorienting our country for the new world we live in, then the 21st century is not going to be an American century. The 21st century is going to be the story of the decline of a once great power at the expense of a new great power that happens to be a communist Marxist dictatorship. And that would be a very sad chapter in human history if that were the case.
It would be, and we see it coming, and there's no doubt about it. Hopefully we can stop it. And there's a lot of families hurting out here. There's no doubt. I think the underdog in America today is the American family. So last thing I want to hit you with here, Senator, I love to ask all the dads that I get on the podcast, what type of advice do you have for that new dad or for that about to be father who's out there listening?
Well, the first thing I would say is that it's the most important thing that you'll ever do in your life. And it may not seem that way when they're 3 weeks old and all they need is to be fed and have a diaper change. But I'm telling you, it starts on day one. And it is the most influential job you'll ever have. I don't care if you're president of the United States. I don't care if you're a commissioner of the National Football League. I don't care if you're a U.S. senator. Whatever job you'll ever have, whatever career you're in, or ever how much money you make, the single most influential role you will ever play is the role of a father. For better and for worse, fathers can do great things. And fathers can do great damage too. For a daughter, the example of what a man is or shouldn't be is their dad. For a son, the example of what a husband is or shouldn't be is a son. Now, look, you can do everything right as a dad, and things may still not turn out because that's the nature of life, and it's unfortunate. Humans are complex. But you give your kids the best chance to succeed, and this is a statistical reality that cannot be disputed. Kids have a best chance to succeed when they have two parents that are committed to their upbringing, and fathers are a critical component of that. And that is a role that fathers should never surrender, not to your wife, not to society, not to your teachers, and most certainly not to television or TikTok or Instagram. You cannot surrender that. You've got to be engaged and active. It's the most important job you'll ever have.
Amen. I love the message. This has been an honor for me, Senator Marco
My honor.
Rubio. You are a first-class father all the way, and thank you so much for giving me a few minutes of your time on First Class Fatherhood.